facing today are enormous, and President Biden's agenda is the remedy to much of their hardships. It's just what the American people want and what they need. And it's exactly why we need to focus on getting the job done, to finalize and pass this legislation and deliver help for the American people. Last night, I held another round of talks going past midnight with a number of my colleagues as we approach a final agreement. Talks with the White House, the Speaker, my Senate colleagues and chairs, and members of the House. We continue to make very good progress each day. Passing such transformative legislation is not easy, but the long hours we are putting into it will be well worth it for the American people. Over the last 24 hours, the hard work has yielded an important new development. Yesterday, I announced that Democrats had reached an agreement to include provisions in Build Back Better that will lower prescription drug prices for seniors and for American families. This is a big deal. For years, skyrocketing costs of prescription drugs have plagued millions of seniors and American families, to the point that Americans spend far more on prescription drugs per capita than other wealthy nations. It's one of the largest out-of-pocket medical expenses that families have, and it's gotten worse over the last few years. For too many Americans, all it takes is a sudden serious illness, and you can find yourself spending hundreds, if not thousands, and several thousands of dollars per year just to afford things like insulin or vitally needed cancer treatments. It's profoundly unfair and wholly un-American. Imagine the strain you can face. Someone, you or a loved one, is ill and you can't afford the medicine, and you see their condition getting worse and worse. I can't think of things that are worse than that, although I guess there may be a few. Yesterday, we took a large step forward in helping alleviate that problem. For the first time ever, Medicare will be empowered to directly negotiate prices in Part B and Part D. This will directly reduce out-of-pocket drug spending for millions of patients every time they visit a pharmacy or a doctor. Our agreement does other things as well. It will cap out-of-pocket spending at $2,000 per year, ending the dilemma I just spoke about, where a life-changing diagnosis could mean thousands upon thousands of dollars in new expenses that an individual can't afford. This agreement will lower insulin prices so that Americans with diabetes don't pay more than $35 per month for their insulin. Let me repeat that, because it's amazing how the cost of insulin used to be so reasonable and has skyrocketed over the last few years with very little reasonable, justifiable explanation. This agreement will lower insulin prices so that Americans with diabetes don't pay more than $35 per month for their insulin. And it will reform the pharmaceutical industry to stop price gouging and make sure our country's drug pricing system benefits patients, not corporations. It's not everything all of us wanted, but it's a major, major step in the right direction as we work to help the American people afford their better prescription drugs. We're going to keep working to make it even better, but this is a really good start and a major, major announcement. I want to thank all my colleagues who had a hand in putting this agreement together. Senator Wyden, Senator Klobuchar, Senator Murphy, Senator Cortez Masto, Senator Bennett, and Senator Kelly. And I also want to sincerely thank Senator Sinema for working with us to reach this agreement. We are going to build on this success as we continue making progress on the rest of Build Back Better. We are close, we are determined, we are confident that we will succeed in rewarding the trust that the American people have placed in us. Now on voting rights. Shortly before his death, the great John Lewis offered the American people a parting message. When you see something that is not right, he said, you must say something. You must do something. Democracy is not a state. It is an act, and each generation must do its part to help build what we call the beloved community. The words of the great, late John Lewis. Well, today the Senate is being called to take action, because across our beloved democracy, something indeed is not right. Something malicious is afoot. A lie, a terrible lie, spread by the former President of the United States, is eating away corrosively at the foundations of our democracy, of our democratic heritage, like a disease. This lie has led to the greatest coordinated effort at the state level to suppress voting rights since the era of segregation. In states like Georgia and Texas, Iowa and Florida and Arizona, and many others, partisans have rewritten the rules of our elections in broad daylight, potentially making it harder for tens of millions of young, minority, low-income, disabled, and generally Democratic-leaning voters from participating in elections. Today, the Senate will have a chance to respond to these attacks by voting to simply begin consideration of the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. It's a common-sense proposal to reinstate the preclearance provisions of the Voting Rights Act, which were wrongfully struck down by a conservative Supreme Court, and which have a long history of bipartisan support in the Senate. I want to thank my colleague, Senator Leahy, who spoke earlier today, and Chairman Durbin, and all my other Democratic colleagues who had a hand in drafting this proposal. And a special thanks to our colleague, the Senator from Alaska, who announced yesterday that she will vote in favor of opening debate on the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. I know it was not a decision she made lightly. She called me from Alaska and let me know of it. But my Democratic colleagues worked hard with her to compromise on a proposal that she could support while still maintaining the basic thrust of their legislation. Now, just as Democrats in the Senate work with Senator Murkowski on legislation to strengthen our democracy, we'll work with other Republicans in good faith to improve this legislation. But they must come to the table first. I want to emphasize once again what today's vote is about. We are not asking any Republican to support specific legislation. Today is about whether or not we will vote to begin debate here in this chamber. Again, the preclearance provisions that are being updated in today's bill have long been supported by both sides of the aisle repeatedly. The Voting Rights Act, which originally instituted them, has been updated 5 times in the last half-century, under both Republican and Democratic presidents, and with votes from both sides. This has always been a bipartisan issue in the past. It should be no different today. And I commit to my Republican colleagues that we will have a full-fledged debate process here on the floor, where our colleagues can offer germane amendments and voice what concerns they may have. Now, I hope more members on the other side of the aisle follow in Senator Murkowski's example. Senate Republicans shouldn't be afraid of merely starting debate on an issue we've long debated and long supported in the past. Merely crossing arms and squelching any opportunity for progress is unacceptable. If Republicans have different ideas on how to achieve a stronger democracy, they owe it to the American people to come forward and debate their ideas. I hope they do the right thing and vote for cloture to move forward on this discussion later today. And finally, on Mr. Syed. So, Mr. President, for every executive branch nominee that grabs headlines, there are many, many more who escape the spotlight while still playing an essential role in our government. And almost always, these nominees proceed through this chamber with bipartisan support. But today, as a handful of extreme Republican senators are needlessly and callously stonewalling many of President Biden's uncontroversial nominees. The case of Dilawar Syed, nominated to be second in charge at the SBA, stands out as particularly egregious. He is an American success story. He came to this country from Pakistan decades ago, became a successful entrepreneur, small business owner, and coalition builder. His nomination is backed by more than 200 civic, government, higher education, and business groups and leaders, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, hardly a mouthpiece for the Biden administration. And upon his confirmation, Mr. Syed would be the highest-ranking Muslim in government, highest-ranking Muslim for Senate confirmation. But for reasons that confound common sense, a handful of Republicans in the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee are not just blocking Mr. Syed's vote, they're refusing to meet in order to allow his nomination to proceed. They're just not even meeting, and that holds his nomination up. I haven't heard of that happening in a very long time. And to date, what is so confounding, Mr. President, is that these Republicans who are holding Mr. Syed up have failed to offer a clear reason why they oppose him. Each time they try to come up with an explanation, whether it's cheap ad hominem attacks or partisan tie-ins to the culture wars, their arguments fall flat and are easily refuted. Why are these handful of Republicans opposing this nomination? Although Republicans have boycotted his markup several times, they'll have a chance to give this man his vote tomorrow. Chairman Cardin has worked with Republicans to try to get them to show up to tomorrow's markup. I commend Chairman Cardin's effort. Today I ask, will any Republicans have the decency to show up tomorrow to his markup and give Mr. Syed a vote? If they want to oppose him, they're free to go on record and explain why. But boycotting his markup, resorting to cheap and offensive attacks, and needlessly blocking a qualified public servant is a shameful, shameful course to take. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the